Fantasy Edge podcast, sponsored by Go Baller X Labs and brought to you by the Player Profiler Fantasy Sports Podcast Network, joined by Pete Nova today, very special guest from the Player Profiler world. We're here to do sequel of sorts, part 2 of our Dynasty buy sell that we did about a month or so ago. I think it's time is blending all together right now. We did a pre-draft buy sell Dynasty strategy episode, talked about players we're buying, selling at each position. Now the draft has happened. There's a lot of rumors starting to swirl as we approach offseason minicamps, OTAs, etc. Pete's here to break down all things Dynasty strategy, buy sells with me here tonight. Without further ado, Pete, man, really appreciate you hopping on to do this again. And what's been going on? What's been going on lately in the Player Profiler world?
Yeah, man, appreciate you having me on. Not really much has changed, right? I mean, we're just getting ready to finish, and preparing the guide, the draft kit, right? That we're getting all that started over at Player Profiler for redraft season, as well as just getting out our projections, early projections for this year. So super excited about that. And yeah, I'm just in the weeds, doing my research, kind of trying to start formulating, where I see players and offenses for the year, kind of how I see them panning out. With target distribution and everything else. And you know how it goes sometimes when you just kind of get in the thick of it. So it's kind of nice when you don't have to worry about week to week when you're in the NFL season. You're not on the clock to get content out. So it allows you to kind of have a little bit of a more fine comb to kind of look through some stuff. And it's enjoyable. It's a good time of the year. And I'm excited for the next couple months coming up.
Yeah, absolutely. We've done at the Fantasy Edge podcast here, we did quite a few pre-draft podcasts, more or less on the player profile aspect of these different prospects coming into the draft, right? And trying not to speculate too much on landing spots, on scheme fits, just of historical comparisons, right? College efficiency and which of these skill sets can transfer to, year one success in the NFL and who can help out our fantasy football teams in the short term and the long term. But now we know, right? It's not just the combine results and, creating a model for these player profiles, right? We know the landing spots. We know the offensive coordinators. We know the scheme fits. We know a decent amount right now about the depth charts. Obviously, a lot is going to change from now until the end of the summer, but we're in a different spot now. We can actually start to put together, change our rankings, update our priors, et cetera, et cetera. So, I have my top 300 dynasty rankings and tiers that I released a couple weeks ago, as well as my top 100 rookie rankings and tiers. You can find those on our brand new website, which is fantasyedgehq.com. That's fantasyedgehq.com. Also at the website, you can find links to our free Substack newsletter, which we relaunched a few weeks ago, our podcast, our YouTube channel, all of our social channels. We're posting clips and reels from our long form shows as well. So we're just going to dive right into things here. I'll pull up my screen a couple times as well to show some of the rankings I'm referring to, but I want to go to the quarterback position first. And just looking, I think we don't have to sit here, Pete, and debate who's 1 and 2, Josh Allen, Drake May, etc. I kind of want to dive deeper into the quarterback rankings and see, for me personally, I'll just start off with a guy that I'm higher on than consensus going into the 2026 season. And yes, I know that this guy could, I think when it comes to year one versus, later down the road, I think one guy that I'm going to sell right off the bat is going to be Ty Simpson. And obviously everyone was surprised that he was drafted as high as he was by the Los Angeles Rams. We all know the memes and the videos and GIFs from Sean McVay and his reaction to that. But at the same time, high draft capital is supposed to mean something and has historically meant a lot in prior NFL draft seasons. I just don't see a bright future for Ty Simpson in the event where Stafford retires. There's already been rumors about McVay stepping down from his post when Stafford does decide to move on. And I just think it was a big reach on the Los Angeles Rams' part. And at this point, you may be able to get more for Ty Simpson now than you ever can. His trade value just might be at an all-time high before he ever sets the field because of that upside and what could he be type of first-round quarterback draft pick. So he's one guy off the bat for me where, I get this is, we're talking dynasty here, but I've got him down past QB 25, near QB 30 overall, next to guys like Bryce Young, veterans, Jared Goff, et cetera, et cetera. I just don't know if he's ever going to help my fantasy team either win now or win towards the future. Maybe he'll prove me wrong on that, but he's my first sell coming out of the draft is Ty Simpson. It's like great landing spot on paper. If Matthew Stafford were to ever go down, maybe he's obviously got some good weapons around him. I just don't know if I do trust the profile of the prospect here with Ty Simpson and the longevity that he might be able to have, despite him being a top 15 overall pick in the draft.
Yeah, I'm kind of there with you with Simpson. What I would give pushback on is I expect his value to kind of hold, unless there's no real way for him to lose value. I feel like here, right? If anything, he should gain value if Stafford goes down and it looks bad, and we're saying, yeah, he's definitely not coming back next season. He's going to retire. That's where I see him losing value. The only way he also gaining value, he could also lose value, but just being terrible. I mean, the Rams, I don't think they're locked in to say, hey, if Stafford were to get hurt this year and Ty Simpson was to step on the field and be really bad, I don't think they would be locked in and say, yeah, we're not taking a quarterback next year with how good the class looks. Now, it might be a lot to invest in that group, but again, I think teams are showing us that they're willing to be aggressive and eat the mistakes that they make with the quarterback position. So there is some risk there with Simpson. Ultimately, I don't think he's a panic sell where you have to move him right now. But maybe move him when camp starts, and if he starts to look a little bit better and gets some good reports out of camp, maybe that's a time where you can go sell him, because maybe he gets a little bit more confidence in the dynasty world and streets. A player for me at the quarterback position that I'd be selling right now is Lamar Jackson. Lamar Jackson, great player. He's ranked right now as quarterback 2 in consensus rankings for Dynasty. And I think we're at an inflection point with Lamar. He's 29 years old. He just got paired up with a defensive-minded head coach, and Jesse Minter, kind of similar to the CJ Stroud stuff that worries me. Like, when you have defensive-minded head coaches, it can limit the upside for the offensive side of the football. You also factor in Lamar's 29 years old, right? A lot of his game is using his legs and the rushing ability. And we saw him kind of pile up the injuries last year. He's got this weird thing where he deals with illnesses a lot. I don't know what that is, but it's been time and time again with Lamar where, he's dealt with some sort of illness. And I don't know. I'm not a doctor, and it's not something that's been shared as to what that might be. But for whatever reason, I think at quarterback 2 right now, I think it's a good time to sell Lamar. I think you can tear down from Lamar to like a Jackson Dart, maybe get a pick on top of that, like a first next year. I think that's a wise move to make. Patrick Mahomes is ranked in consensus right now. He's kind of slid a little bit as well. So those are the kinds of moves I would make. I mean, Mahomes, you're going to have to spend, you're not going to get much back. But if you did Dart, who's quarterback 10 in consensus, you could probably get Dart in a first next year. Maybe you could get Caleb Williams, if you were selling to somebody who's a contender and they didn't want to take the chance that Williams and the Bears don't take a step forward next year. But I could even do Caleb straight up, with Lamar, even if you don't really get anything added on top. So that's where I'm at. Lamar, love the player. I just worry about the cliff. And if the legs start to slow down with a more conservative game plan at head coach, I do worry a little bit if we're kind of at that ceiling and, he can only really lose value at this point. And history says his style is going to slow down, we would think, sooner rather than later.
Yeah, no, I think that's a good call. I've got Lamar Jackson as my QB3 in Dynasty. I've got May 1, Allen just in a tier of their own. And then I agree with the Caleb Williams comp. In the last Dynasty Risers and Fallers episode we did with Chad Parsons last week, I talked about Trevor Lawrence. He's a guy that I have rising in my rankings, right? Former number 1 pick overall with Liam Cohen there in town. I do see a very bright future for a guy who's only 26 years old. Then you talk about Lamar Jackson. I think about like with growing up watching the NBA with Allen Iverson, right? Of like, once he loses that elite speed, and his ability to just be able to have the ball in his hands the entire game and have an entire team rely on him, then like, can he fit in and kind of just be like that down to down, pocket passing quarterback, and really, be able to elevate his teammates with just his passing, right? And I give Lamar Jackson a ton of credit. I think over the last 5 years, he's tremendously improved as a passer. But again, like, when is like, when are you going to reach that peak, and when are you going to see the value start to decline? It's hard. It's hard for me to see Lamar Jackson's value rising any more than it has over the last couple seasons, or where it is right now. So I think that's a really good call out. And I think with the thing I mentioned as well with a guy like Ty Simpson, you look at a guy like Michael Penix, who was overdrafted a couple seasons ago, and what is his actual real value now in Dynasty? And I think that once Ty Simpson hits the field, I'm going to just bet on his value declining. And if he proves me wrong, he proves me wrong. But that's kind of the other end of the spectrum. I'll go with one other sell here, and you can wrap it up with a player to buy. I just want to touch on someone that I've been meaning to touch on, haven't been able to in these last couple of shows we've done. But you kind of alluded to a little bit with Houston, CJ Stroud. Like, I've got him QB 23 in my Dynasty rankings right now, and that's 5 spots below the FantasyPros Dynasty consensus. For me, they have him at QB 18 overall. Like, I've got him in my tier 4 alongside guys like Sam Darnold, Daniel Jones, Kyler Murray, veterans like Baker Mayfield, Jared Goff, Matthew Stafford, Bryce Young. I just don't see a world where CJ Stroud is bouncing back right now. Yeah, I know he has Nico Collins, and I love Nico Collins, but the real serious decline and regression we've seen in his game over the last couple seasons, it just makes me think more and more that rookie season was an anomaly. And at some point, like, we could hit an even lower point. We could even hit rock bottom with a guy like CJ Stroud, where he completely loses his confidence, his trade value. So obviously, like, I still think there's a little bit of cachet there where people can still say, yeah, he hasn't even played 5 years yet in the league. He's going to get back to somewhat of that rookie form we saw. I just don't know if that scheme fit is going to be there anymore, like we saw there, and the constant turnover we've seen. We're constantly being disappointed with the offensive coordinators in Houston. And it's like, okay, well, CJ Stroud finally has a chance to right himself, and how he really just flatlined in the playoffs, and the way his confidence looked completely broken. I'm just not sure if we're going to see a bounce back despite him being just 24 years old. So I'm not going to completely bury it in my ranks, but instead of having that in that QB 15 to 20 range, I've got him more in like the QB 20 to 25, borderline 25-ish range as well.
Yeah, and the one that, look, Stroud is the kind of player that I try to avoid, and I'm kind of with you. I have Stroud as my 23rd quarterback behind Kyler, Cam Ward, Mendoza, Stafford, Jared Goff, Tyler Shough, Baker Mayfield, Dak. With Stroud, this is a guy that does not run. So even if we're thinking of a guy that could be in a conservative game plan, which is a concern with that defense and with that coach, he also is not going to make up for it a little bit with his legs, right? This is a guy that his most yards rushing was 233 in 2024. As a rookie, he rushed for 167. Last year, 209. He's not giving you much on the ground. And, the best season of his career was 23 touchdowns. With how things went last year, how good the defense was, I think they want to invest in this run game. That's why David Montgomery's there. They want to run the football. They don't want to have CJ Stroud, airing it out. I do think with Stroud, the nice thing is I'm expecting a contract extension. I know some of the guys at the Player Profiler house that are plugged in, we talked to some guys there, and they've had some conversations with some people that said the Stroud deal is pretty close to just being finalized. So I expect Stroud to be extended, by the time week 1 rolls around. So you do love the idea of the insulation, the safety net. That's really the only thing that's kind of helping Stroud out right now. And what you can hang your hat on is he's a quarterback that's going to get an extension and is going to have a safety net. And he's going to be around and have a starting position for the next 2 to 3 years, most likely because of an extension. Whereas, the ceiling though is just not there for Stroud with the way the offense is fat. Like, don't get me wrong, there's a lot of weapons, but I just don't see this offense airing it out like, some might have hoped. Now, for me, and then we can, I'll tie it up if you have any extra things you want to say. You can go ahead. I mean, you talked about, Tyler Shuck's on, the show sheet here. It's on the title. For me, Tyler Shuck is still a buy. I think you can get him pretty decently priced right now. Like going out there with what the cost of Ty Simpson was in this past draft, there was a world where you could get Ty Simpson and Tyler Shuck, and probably still get Tyler Shuck for that pick on the clock when Ty Simpson's on the board. I would much rather take Tyler Shuck right now. Fantasy Pros has him ranked about 23. Tyler Shuck, I'm about 6 spots ahead on consensus, right around where Baker and Dak are. And so I would, there's a world where you could even flip CJ Stroud for Tyler Shuck and a first next year or 2 next year. Those are a world I wouldn't mind, because the ceiling is higher for Shuck, in my opinion, even if the longevity is, he doesn't have that. He's not tied to a long-term deal and he didn't get first-round draft capital. Those are the only real big concerns I have. But I like the situation that he's in, and the ceiling for fantasy.
Yeah, I'm with you on that. To me, Tyler Shuck is my biggest buy, because I think with these quarterback selections, we want to look at like who's the number 1 overall pick, right? For Fernando Mendoza. Then we look at a guy like Tyler Shuck. He's like, oh, he was overdrafted, but he was still an early second-round pick, even though a lot of us quote-unquote ball knowers thought he was going to go much later in last year's draft, right? But it's all about the landing spot. It's all about the culture, the scheme fit. And I think that if any offense we could be attached to, regardless of ADP price in drafts coming up this offseason, and that have been ongoing, we want to be attached to Kellen Moore's offense. Like the tempo, the pace of play, how many pass attempts they throw per game, their pass rate over expectation. We know that when Kellen Moore was in Philadelphia, we wanted pieces of that entire offense in Philadelphia with Jalen Hurts, A.J. Brown, Devonta Smith, even DeAndre Swift at running back at the time. Like we wanted pieces of that. And as soon as he leaves, we see that offense completely plummet in terms of fantasy value and really expectations, right? We're all disappointed in their respective outputs. So I think with a guy like Tyler Shuck, he fits that system perfectly. He's got enough mobility to make it work. He's also going to be in the right place to where, they might not be winning a ton of games, or maybe they are a little competitive in that division this year, but 26 years old, I think that's a benefit, because like he is a little more experienced than some of these other, second year quarterbacks. And yeah, I think as an overall prospect, you don't want that, but as a dynasty owner, you're like, hey, I got a second year quarterback, but he's 26 years old. Like he knows enough now to hang in this system and to make the most out of this system with Kellen Moore in New Orleans. So absolutely. Like I have it on the screen here in my dynasty rankings. I've got Tyler Shuck QB 17. In terms of my redraft rankings, which I'll be posting my post draft update next week, I'm going to have Tyler Shuck considerably higher than QB 17. This is only of just like, hey, how much long-term potential does he have? Like, I think Malik Willis, Tyler Shuck, both those guys I'm really fascinated in, because you don't have to pay a lot to get them, and they can help you win now, and they could potentially even blossom into bigger, more efficient passers and help you even more long-term as well. So I really like to call it on that. And it seems like it's more of a polarizing of a dynasty prospect, where it's like, yeah, Tyler Shuck redraft best ball, that's great, but dynasty, I'm not that interested. I actually am very interested in dynasty, because I think you can get off a higher price than Lamar Jackson, plug in Tyler Shuck, and be able to accumulate a ton of assets. And how much points per game are you actually losing at the end of the day in the box score this upcoming season? I'm not really sure if it's going to be all that much. So
yeah.
I
would, and the one thing I would add with Shuck and just quarterbacks in general is, you make a point of like the age, and the age is a concern for like running backs, wide receivers, tight ends, like whatever. You can make the argument for quarterbacks though. Look, I operate for dynasty in 2 to 3 year windows, right? And even at quarterback, yes, it's great. You find a guy like Drake May, you don't want to move off him. If you have a good roster, there's no need to move off him. As long as that dynasty league is active and it doesn't fold, you got a quarterback that's going to be locked in, for the next 4, 5, 6 years, and you're golden. But the truth is, like with a guy like Shuck, if you get 2 to 3 good years, fringe quarterback 1 years from him, you'd be happy. And like you said, quarterbacks coming in, older are not concerning for me because, again, 2 to 3 year windows, but also it's the maturity, it's the accumulation of how many reps they've had. A lot of these quarterbacks come in and they don't have those reps, or they don't have enough, and it takes them a little bit of time to get settled and to get comfortable. I think that's part of why Tyler Shough looked as good as he did last year, because of the maturity, because of the age. And so I think that's a benefit. And some of these quarterbacks staying in college a little longer, there's risk, like Garrett Nussmeier, but it can also be a benefit if you stay back, and can kind of sharpen your skills and get another year under your belt.
Yeah, for sure. Let's move on to running backs here. Pete, I'll let you start off this position. Who's one running back that you're either buying or selling? I know we talked a lot about Kenneth Walker before the draft. I don't know if much really changed there, despite them drafting Emmett Johnson. But any guy high in the rankings, low in the rankings, who's one guy that stands out to you post draft in terms of buying or selling here?
Yeah, I'm buying Chase Brown. Chase Brown is in my top 12 for running backs right now. I think that the Cincinnati Bengals proved to us and proved to me, because I was not a big believer in Chase Brown last offseason. I started to kind of buy into it once I saw what they did with the draft. But to be honest with you, like, this team still hasn't really added anything significant. Yes, Samaje Perine was a thorn in the side at times last year, but Chase Brown plays in a very unique situation, right? He has two alphas on the outside, and T. Higgins and Jamar Chase, that are going to continuously open up light boxes for him to get room to run. And so that's definitely helpful. Now, the Bengals did add to the defense, so it should be a little bit better, but they're still going to be trying to air the football out. I don't think there's going to become a conservative, approach from them. With the talent that they have, they're still going to have their foot to the, down to the pedal to the metal with the offense. But I think Chase Brown's a guy that gets overlooked because he's not the flashiest. He's not the most explosive player, but he's a great receiving back. He's in a very, very, secure position right now with not much talent on the roster at the position. And I think there's a chance that they go ahead and extend him soon. 26 years old. I think his skill set wise, this is a guy that he doesn't take a lot of hard hits. He doesn't play, super, super tough physical. So you should be able to get 2 years at least of, top 12 kind of play from him. And with running backs, to me, I always look at it like this. If a running back can give me, if I look at a running back and say, yeah, he can give me a top 12 season, that guy has to be in like my top 16 for Dynasty, regardless of age, because the Dynasty running back landscape changes so fast with injuries, with age, and with competition in the room that, yes, 2 to 3 year windows is kind of how I like to operate. But if you can give me an elite season, or at least a true running back one season, that matters. And if I can guarantee that, that's more than I can say for guys like Bashal Tutin, who is kind of rising up a little bit this year, and his situation's still a little gray. There's some guys towards the back end, RJ Harvey, right? Those are guys where it's like, can I really say top 12 season for them? There are things that have to happen for it to happen, like, injury in the room or whatever for their, role to expand. But Chase Brown, like, that you can clearly see the path of how does he get to a top 12 running back this year. And it's not that hard when you think about the passing volume in the offense, the light boxes, and just the touchdown equity that will be there. And the possibility of them also giving him an extension, which I think is very possible before the season starts as well.
Yeah, no, I really like the call out there. I mean, yes, it feels like he hasn't been in the league that long, already 26 years old, but has only played those couple seasons so far. Came in, obviously, after a lot of years at Illinois, 5th round draft pick, but does the draft capital matter anymore? No, because like you said, he's in that role. He's got the talent around him. They trust in him. Yep. He's going to get all the high value touches. Like a lot of people last year were kind of bashing him like mid-season about sell Chase Brown. Samaje Perine's coming in and taking these snaps and carries away. But, Samaje Perine is coming in and taking those low value touches away, right? Like the in between the 20s carries, like some of the early down carries. We want Chase Brown at the goal line. We want him getting the majority of the targets, and we know he's explosive as well. Like you see it up on the player profiler screen that we have up, obviously 94th percentile burst score, 92nd percentile 40-yard dash, was 91st percentile college rating, above average college target share. So he checks all those boxes that we want despite his round 5 capital, and he's already surpassed that expectation of being a round 5 running back prospect in the NFL. For me personally, I've got Chase Brown technically a few spots lower than consensus, but I've got him in this really large tier, as you can see here. I have my top 8 Dynasty running backs. I've got Chase Brown 14, but I've got him around guys like Omarion Hampton, Travion Henderson, Kenneth Walker, Travis Etienne. So I totally can see somebody being in the same, being like, hey, like I want to get off Josh Jacobs and move to Chase Brown and make that trade happen. Absolutely, I'd like to do that. Same with Saquon Barkley, Christian McCaffrey, even if you're looking long term. So I'd like to call out there one guy that I've got one spot above Chase Brown, and it feels like he's been in the league twice as long, but is the same age, 26 years old, as Javonte Williams. And I think that we're still being held back from the couple seasons where he came into the league, really exploded onto the scene. We're like, oh, this is gonna be the next great rookie running back prospect. Then he gets hurt. Then he comes back from injury too early, has a couple frustrating seasons, right? And we're thinking like, oh, this guy's career's done. But he's only 26 years old. He got the contract from Dallas, right? And I think in the same vein, with the way Dallas is set up is very similar to how the Bengals are set up, right? Like they've got the veteran quarterback there in Dak Prescott. I don't see him moving on anytime soon. You've got CeeDee Lamb, you've got Dak Prescott, and then you've got Javonte Williams to come in. And even though he didn't have like the most explosive second half of the season, you look at the games like here, like he's consistently giving you RB2 and RB2 numbers throughout the season, even though he was dealing with injuries late last year as well. We see, before the bye, obviously half the season, 4 or 5 different games of RB10 production or better on the week. So I think Javonte Williams can actually get better from what we saw last year in terms of what he did before the bye. And I just frankly don't see anyone else on that Dallas depth chart that's going to challenge him whatsoever. So it feels like he's been in the league a lot longer, but at 26 years old, I think he absolutely could have a couple seasons in him where he's the lead back and getting almost all the high value touches for one of the maybe most borderline top 5 most explosive offenses in the league with Dallas. And I love the situation there. So I'm going to be buying Javonte Williams. And I don't think you really have to pay a whole lot to get Javonte Williams as a quality RB2 back on your roster for short-term production this season, as well as the next couple seasons as well.
Yeah, I'm with you on Javonte as well. He's been a guy that I'm looking to buy as well right now. I've sent out some offers. I have Javonte Williams ranked ahead of Bucky Irving right now. Bucky Irving is a sell for me. Just a lot of concern about Bucky, and I would rather tier down to Javonte, right? Javonte's only 26 years old, and he did just get the extension. And the thing about a guy like Javonte, this is a kind of player who lasts in the league a long time because he's a player that coaches and quarterbacks can trust. Great pass blocker. That's always been the thing with him is he's very, very good. He's an elite pass protector at the running back position. He's one of the best in the NFL. And so that's something that's always going to give him a role and have him stick around. And when you're attached to an offense that loves to throw the football, like he's always going to be in there for those passing downs. And so there's value there. And what he did last year was impressive. It was really nice to see him kind of shake the rust off and, kind of shake the narrative, right? He looked really bad in Denver the last 2 years with the injury, and then just trying to come back. It just didn't really work out. But he seems like he's got a fresh mindset. It's a fresh start for him. He did enough to get Jerry Jones to sign another running back to an extension after the Ezekiel Elliott extension. So that should tell you enough that Jerry feels confident in him as well. What I also would say, about Javonte too is really good hands out of the backfield. It's not just the pass protection, but obviously it's the passing downs and the receiving work. And he can also work at the goal line. But there's really not much in this room. This is a true 3-down skill set. There is not really many running backs that we can point to in the NFL this year that we're going to say, hey, this guy is going to get all the work. And I think you can confidently say Javonte has to be up there in the top 10 for at least opportunity share for all running backs in the NFL coming in this year, right? I mean, Phil Maffa, Jaden Blue. There's really just not many guys in that room. So I like to call out on Javonte as well.
Yeah, I mean, like, Malik Davis, I like him when he plays, but he's not a guy that they're serious about becoming, the franchise RB and full-time starter there. And like, I'll be the first to admit, and I think this is something that you and we play so much fantasy, we overlook this compared to more casual players that are just getting into Dynasty or that are looking to expand their portfolios and just leagues in general, whether it's best ball, just getting off your priors, your opinions is so important as a as just part of like I wouldn't even go so far as to call it a strategy, but it has to be part of your strategy, right? Like you never get married to a player take, never get married to an opinion. Going into last year, I was completely off. I was completely out on Javonte Williams, right? And like that's totally fine. Like he proved me wrong, and now I'm back in because of the age, because of the situation, right? And we see like it's not just that this is some veteran who just got a good opportunity and fell into a bunch of touchdowns. Like, no, like he had a career high 4.8 yards per carry, right? Scored 11 touchdowns, broke off a career high long run of 66 yards. We see the stats on the screen there. And I think there's room to grow even in the receiving department as well with him. So, I really like Javonte Williams. I like to call out on Chase Brown. Who's one running back that you're selling in this range or a little bit lower down the board?
Yeah, I alluded to it, and I won't take up too much time on it, but it's Bucky Irving for me. It's just a lot of red flags for Bucky. I talked about it on my show last week, but Bucky Irving, you have the shoulder injury. Originally, it was a foot injury, then it became a shoulder. It was like every week it was like we have no idea if Bucky's coming back. Then all of a sudden we hear, there's some mental health stuff going on, and we don't want to speculate too much on that, but it's just that there's a lot of things going on here. Smaller running back, right? A guy that, fourth round capital. Yes, he looked really good his first year, but we have to sometimes be fluid about situations that are changing. This is a new coaching staff. Zach Robinson is here now, and Kenneth Gainwell was one of the bigger signings or first signings that they made this offseason. Kenneth Gainwell had 80 targets last year. He's a receiving back that's going to cap Bucky's ceiling, in my opinion, for at least this year. Now, Dynasty, again, 2 to 3 year windows, but for at least this year, we're talking about Bucky, who's now going into year, I want to say it's year 3. What does it look like for him for an extension? He's still young, 23 years old, but I just think the ceiling is capped a little bit with Kenneth Gainwell. And Zach Robinson came from Atlanta. And in Atlanta, Zach Robinson had the best running back in football in Bijan Robinson, and still had somewhat of a committee with Tyler Algier vulturing touches. So Bucky Irving is not Bijan Robinson. So who is to say that Kenneth Gainwell is not going to be able to steal touches in the receiving game, and Sean Tucker is not going to be that big body that Zach Robinson liked to use last year with Tyler Algier at the goal line? I think those are all very real concerns. And to top it all off, he's still not healthy right now from a shoulder injury that he had months ago. So I have some concerns about Bucky. I'll share this. I traded Garrett Wilson for Bucky Irving in a league that was very stingy at moving running backs, and I knew I was overpaying a little bit for Bucky, but I had a lot of wide receiver talent, and that was like a month and a half, 2 months ago, and I'm regretting that move right now. I would much rather Garrett Wilson over Bucky in a vacuum. So that's how fluid and quickly the running back landscape can change. And that's why I talked about, can you give me a top 12 performance? Can you give me that? And if you can, that has to matter. Then, hey, is this guy going to get a second contract? He's 23 years old when he gets drafted. Like the RJ Harvey conversation. Like, I don't know, like 60% of running backs don't get a second contract. Like, let's focus on what they can do. What's the impact? How many top 12 seasons can they give us now? Can you imagine? And that's the kind of thing that my mind goes to. And so I have some hesitations about Bucky right now.
Yeah. I have him in that same tier that we're talking about right now, that really wide gap of tier 2 backs. But I'm with you. Like, he's a guy where I might need to adjust my rankings and just move him down just visually to be lower than consensus, because I feel like when the time comes for me to be on the clock, like he's not a guy I'm excited to click right now, right? So yeah, technically I have him in the same tier, but he's a day 3 running back at the end of the day, right? Like what's really the difference between a day 3 running back and a undrafted running back? Because there really isn't much when you talk about those second contracts. And I agree on him as a sell as well, and didn't come in with elite metrics. It is a lot smaller than your average starting running back. I think that Kenneth Gainwell, they signed him for a reason. He kind of had his own breakout season last year in Pittsburgh, and I think he could even. It's not just like a pet project of Aaron Rodgers. Like Kenneth Gainwell could be the real deal as a receiving running back in this offense. And let's not forget about Sean Tucker, who I thought just looked flat out better than Bucky Irving all of last season when he touched the ball. He's a guy I'll throw in as my final guy to wrap up the running back position. I'm just going to throw in Sean Tucker. Yes, he was undrafted, 15 pounds heavier than Bucky Irving, right? Pretty much the same exact age. Look at his metrics coming into the league, 90th percentile 40-yard dash, 95th percentile bench press. This guy is fast. This guy is strong. He's got juice, not to mention he had a 95th percentile college target share. We saw him break off a couple of those long touchdown runs last season. I thought the Bucs offense was flat out better when Sean Tucker was getting the ball last season. And I think at some point, the coaches, Baker Mayfield, et cetera, they're going to realize that and know that they need Sean Tucker more on the field. And God forbid something happens again to Bucky Irving's shoulder. Like, can you imagine a backfield where we know it's going to be all the touchers are going to Sean Tucker and Kenneth Gainwell? I'd want to roster both of those running backs in that scenario, right? So I think for the price that you could get him, just pure eye test for me, like I really like what I've seen out of Sean Tucker when he's gotten opportunities. And because he was undrafted, it's just, I think he's just going to keep having to prove himself a little more than other guys are going to have to. But you're going to get to a point where you're like, you know what? This guy has juice. We want to get him the ball. And I kind of see the trend line going in Sean Tucker's favor for being more than just a goal line running back in Tampa Bay as well. So I think that's enough running back talk, Pete. We'll jump off to the wide receiver position now. For me personally, I know we talked a lot about AJ Brown in the last Dynasty buy sell episode. I talked about him as a sell, but when I started to really look at things now, like, he's 28 years old, and let's just assume he's going to be in New England, right? Like the deadline, or that the June 1st date is about 10 days away now from the time of us recording here. I just think, like, why can't AJ Brown have another Randy Moss mini career revival when he goes to New England and plays with Drake May in that situation? So I'm surprised, because I didn't think that the expert consensus on FantasyPros would have AJ Brown all the way down at wide receiver 19. Like, just a year ago, he was like a borderline top 5 consensus Dynasty wide receiver. And I bumped him down from my rankings, sure. But I just think that it's gone a little bit too far in terms of what Kevin Patullo did in Philadelphia last season to really just tank the public perception of these guys. And I think AJ Brown has gotten the brunt of that. And like you said, these 2 to 3 year Dynasty windows of, can AJ Brown give me elite PPR production over the next 3 seasons? And I'm not worried about a wide receiver crossing into the age 30 range as much as I am running backs, obviously, right? I just think the hate has gone a little bit too far in AJ Brown, and I called him a sell, but I think the market has completely overreacted to this, and he now becomes a buy just because, why can't he be a top 10 receiver again in the right scheme with the right quarterback? I see Randy Moss 2.0 coming again between Tom Brady to Randy Moss. Now it's going to be Drake May to AJ Brown, and I think there's going to be a lot of fantasy goodness to go around here once he lands in New England.
Yeah, and obviously, my thoughts, and I won't hammer the point away too much, but I think with AJ, you're looking at a player who has been a top 12 wide receiver in a points per game basis year after year after year. I mean, the last 4 seasons, we're talking, a guy that's just consistently giving you and churning these wide receiver 1 years. And I think you look at AJ, and if he goes to the Patriots and you told me, hey, AJ Brown is going to give you 2 more seasons of wide receiver 1 play, I would tell you, and so you said, what is that worth? To me, I'd say, well, that's got to be worth at least a top 20 ranking at the lowest, right? I mean, I have A.J. Brown at wide receiver 16 ahead of Rome, behind Lab McConkey and George Pickens. That's where I have A.J. And I'm with you. Like, I think, A.J. going there, that's also like, that's saying 2 seasons. What happens after 2 seasons too? Is he fringe mid wide receiver 2, high end wide receiver 2? Like, it's possible. And I also think many are talking about how the play looks like it's dropping off for him. I think people have to realize too, mentally, the guy was checked out, right? Wide receivers are full of divas. And I think it was very clear that AJ Brown was not giving it his all last season. So yeah, I'm right there with you. I mean, let's get spicy, I guess, and just talk about it. Rashee Rice is obviously the big name and the guy that everyone wants to kind of know where people value him, where people have him in rankings. Rankings are tricky, right? Because where I have a guy ranked doesn't mean that that's where I would sell him for, right? Value in the market, you have to understand where you value him and where the market values him. And if the market values a player higher than where you do, they're usually a sell, right? But just because my rankings have Rashee Rice as wide receiver 27 for me doesn't mean that the market feels the same way. I put it out there on Twitter. I got a lot of pushback on it, but I would trade Brian Thomas Jr. for Rashee Rice straight up. And if I could get a little bit more on top, I would do that as well. I think you can. I looked at Dynasty Daddy. There were plenty of trades where Rashee Rice is still being valued as a top 20 wide receiver. And I think there's a lot of people that are going to say, well, he's not getting suspended, so who cares? But I think a lot of Dynasty players are not thinking about the fact that he's got no insulation with the Chiefs. This is a guy that's going to want to try to get the biggest bag he can get next year after this season, because the Chiefs are probably not going to pony up with a lot of guaranteed money unless he's absolutely elite, which I don't think he's that kind of player. I think he's a good player, but he's gotten spammed a lot of volume. He's not a top 12. He's not an elite player. And so I think he's going to test the market probably after this season. And I don't think Kansas City's going to be willing to pay. It's probably going to be a team that's got a lot of empty, deep pockets, that needs a wide receiver that's willing to take a chance on a guy like him. And so if he's not with Patrick Mahomes in this very, very niche role of him being like a low ADOT player, what is his value in a lower volume offense where his skill tree is not that great? I just don't see his skill set translating well. And then obviously you have the concerns of the guy just can't get out of his own way. So yes, 27 feels aggressive. I have him right ahead of Marvin Harrison Jr. And even still, I still have kind of questions, but the red flags have been there, and I think you can still sell for him for a good price without saying, oh, this is selling low. I just got to hold on to him because I don't want to sell him low. I think you can still get really good value for him.
Yeah, I could go both ways, and I like his skill set and his profile personally, but I think the latter part of what you said, like the mindset and the mentality, right? Because to me, you see the metrics up on the board, right? Like 6 foot, 200 pounds, elite burst score, borderline elite catch radius, and he earned these targets at an elite level in college, 33.2% college target share, 96th percentile. So I think that goes to show this guy is good at earning targets and filling that slot role and what he can do after the catch. But at the same time, like, he could end up in a lot worse of a situation than with Patrick Mahomes. And that's where you start to worry overall, where it's like the talent's not good enough. And then the head case stuff starts to pop in, right? So I've got him 7 spots below the ECR Dynasty rankings on FantasyPros. I've got him at wide receiver 22. He's at the tail end of my tier 2 of receivers, which starts with George Pickens at wide receiver 11, goes all the way down to Rashee Rice at wide receiver 22. I would slightly prefer guys like, Tyson and Lemon, Jamison Williams, Devonta Smith, Jalen Waddle, T. Higgins. But I've got him kind of in that same range as well. But I think that's a very interesting call out for sure. And yeah, like if he has a great year this year, but then the contract comes up going into 2027, then you might want to sell high as well. And that's an interesting dynamic to think of. Is there anyone else you want to talk here at wide receiver? I know we're going to talk about a couple tight ends here. I talked a lot of, you brought up Marvin Harrison. I don't want to like beat that one to death, but I talked a lot about last week of like, I'm actually higher on Michael Wilson than Marvin Harrison. And I think if you just swap the names on the jerseys, everyone else would be too. So I've got Marvin Harrison a decent bit past consensus. I got him as my wide receiver 32. He's dynasty consensus right now, wide receiver 27. I at this point, like, I'm taking Michael Wilson, I'm taking Brian Thomas, Egbuka, Zay Flowers, Casey Concepcion over a guy like Marvin Harrison. Like, I'm just out. He couldn't even do it last year when Jacoby Brissett was throwing insane volume for the Arizona Cardinals, tanking in that situation. So I'm out personally, but I also agree, like, why would you sell him right now for pennies on the dollar? Because you got to think there are some better games and better seasons ahead for him. So maybe he ends up being like an average, like good, solid receiver, but nowhere near what we thought he was going to be coming into the league.
Yeah, and my final call out and real quick would be just a player that I'm buying is Christian Watson. I have him as my wide receiver 33. I might still have him move him up a little bit more, but I'm just really excited about what he can do. I like what I saw. You're aggressive on him too. It looks like at 26, and this is a room and a team that Jaden Reed is now there. So while many might look at that as that's concerning, I also look at it like they're not going to probably invest very heavily in this room. They put first round capital in Matthew Golden, who I don't think is very good. Jaden Reed is now extended, right? So Christian Watson has, doesn't really have a guy that's going to be a massive target earner. If this guy can stay healthy, which is always the biggest question mark, and people are always going to say, that's always the question with him. And I get it, but the truth is he looked phenomenal last year. He arguably looked like one of the better receivers in the NFL when he came back from injury for like a 5, 6, 7 week stretch. So Christian Watson, I think, is a really, really good buy right now. I think people are still kind of, thinking of him as the injury prone guy. And I think you can really, really get some good value on him if you try to trade for him. So Christian Watson's a guy that I'm looking to get more exposure to.
Yeah, I got him at wide receiver 26 in Dynasty. I think you removed the injury concerns we had from a couple seasons ago. The Packers offense right now makes sense. It was so convoluted and cluttered in the depth chart the last couple seasons, but now it's like, Reed is the slot guy, right? He's not going to play in 2 receiver sets. Golden, they want to be the field stretcher. Tucker Kraft, when healthy, is going to be the go-to tight end almost every down player. Well, like, who's going to be the receiver alpha? And I think that Christian Watson is starting to emerge into that category where he's no longer just that deep threat. He can really do it at all levels of the field. So I'm really high in Christian Watson. I trust in Jordan Love. I trust in the situation there and them being an above average offense for at least the next couple of seasons. So I like that call out for sure. Tight end for me, I know we talked a lot. We did our super quick post-draft mock draft on the Player Profiler network when we were over at the Draft House about a month ago. We talked about a lot of rookies as well, so I want to try to keep it to non-rookie talk for the sake of this specific episode. Is there anyone specific for you that jumps out? I feel like everyone's like, we all have the top 3 consensus, right? Bowers, McBride, Loveland, we get it. You want to rank them in a certain type of area as another fantasy player. I'm not going to try to argue with you. To me, that's a clear tier 1. I like Fannin as like a borderline in that tier, but I'm also not going to argue if you've got him a little bit lower than guys like Tyler Warren and Tucker Kraft. Anyone stand out to you in terms of this top 15, top 20 here right now going into 2026 at tight end?
Yeah, I think Kyle Pitts has become more intriguing as the days go on. This is a guy who's in a contract year, kind of started to break out a little bit last year again. And he looked like he finally started to settle in. The obvious concerns are what does this look like from a standpoint of this offense with the quarterbacks? But I did some digging into this Atlanta Falcons offense and how I project it to be. And Austin Hooper, who played actually in Atlanta, but also played with Kevin Stefanski with the Browns, I think he's going to play a lot of inline. I think Kyle Pitts is going to play out wide. Not out wide, but I think he's going to play in kind of a move flanker position at times, kind of like a big slot at the tight end position. And people say, well, isn't that what we've always projected him to be? But I think this is now an offense where we can see him flourish, where we've seen it be successful. Harold Fannin Jr. was used a lot in the slot last year as well, while David Njoku was kind of sacrificed in some ways. And I think Kyle Pitts is a guy that will flourish in the offense. We saw Harold Fannin play very well. And I think with this scheme, right, you're looking at kind of a an outside zone scheme with a lot of play action, a lot of quick hitters, getting the ball out fast. This is a team that doesn't have really an established wide receiver too. Zachariah Branch, it's a lot of misfits over there outside of Zachariah Branch, who hasn't really had a chance to, prove himself just yet. And so I think Kyle Pitts becomes that number 2 wide receiver on this team. And I think 95 to 100 targets is very, very possible for him this year. And the idea of the ball coming out quickly, I think is a benefit for him because he'll be on the inside where he'll get a lot of looks. So Kyle Pitts is a player. I think I'm not saying he's undervalued, overvalued. I'm just saying where he's currently valued, I am good to go out and buy him. And I'm intrigued at his cost. And there's also a guy that could get extended or could go somewhere else. But so there's no insulation there. But you could also maybe be intrigued by that too. He might go get a bag somewhere else after the season, while Drake London and Bijan Robinson are all on contract years as well. So or maybe not contract years, but I think Bijan's on his option, or has a 5th-year option, and then London. So it looks like the extensions are coming, but Pitts is on a contract year. So I don't know if they're going to keep everybody, and I would think Pitts is probably odd man out.
Yeah, I mean, I keep saying this, like what would have Kyle Pitts done if Drake London was fully healthy in the second half of last season? Would he have done any of what he did, right? But if you're going to tell me that he is going to play primarily as a receiver, then that absolutely will change the ball game there. I've got him right around consensus in my Dynasty rankings. For me, one guy I'm selling tight end is Brenton Strange. Yeah, he's young, only 25 years old. Yes, I want pieces of this Jacksonville offense, and I love Trevor Lawrence. I talked about him on our Risers and Fallers show last week. But to me, show me what you're doing, right? Don't tell me. I think we're going to get a lot of chatter this offseason about Brenton Strange, our starting tight end. We like him as our, in our future offense. But, he really only contributed as a consistent fantasy option when other guys were out last season. Travis Hunter banged up, before they trade for Jacoby Myers, before Parker Washington emerges. And once all those guys were really healthy together, obviously sans Travis Hunter, Brenton Strange was kind of mediocre. I don't know. He never showed of like, hey, like this is going to be a future top 10 tight end option. And then you just go out and you draft round 2 tight end and next forfeiture, right? You also take Tanner Koziel, very talented pass catching tight end, who I really like a lot as a late round sleeper in rookie drafts as well. I don't know. To me, I see the yards per reception numbers, pretty, I would say modest at best. A couple times he eclipsed 50 yards. But if you look at post buy for Brenton Strange, you're seeing, 27 yards, 26 yards, 39 yards, 45 yards. If he's not catching a touchdown, he's not really going to be a top 10 tight end for you. And the fact that they're bringing in, they invested multiple draft picks. And this is the Liam Cohen system. Like, these are the guys he wants. He didn't sign Brenton Strange. He didn't draft Brenton Strange. And I think Brenton Strange at some point could be trade bait, or he could just be the odd man out when we start looking into 2027 and reflecting back on what did we see happen on the depth chart over the course of the later parts of the year in Jacksonville. So he's a guy I've got a tight end 23 in Dynasty, where the consensus has him as tight end 16. I've got him in a pretty big tier, but he's borderline going into the next tier of guys where you start to talk about Dallas Scott or Hunter Henry, more veteran guys like that. So I'm going to be selling Brenton Strange this offseason if I can.
Yeah, I'm okay with that call out too. This is an offense that threw to the wide receiver position a ton last year. Top 5 in the NFL for targets to the wide receiver. Well, target share to the wide receiver position. There's only so many mouths to go around. If you're somebody who believes in Bashal Tutin, right? How does he get there with all these wide receivers? How does he get there if you also believe in Brenton Strange? Like, there's just too much. And also with the additions at the tight end position, Brenton Strange is a very good blocker. So he might get sacrificed to be inside as well on a lot of these runs and a lot of these, heavy set personnel. And if they do become more of a heavier run team, what does that mean for Strange? So I just think there's a lot of question marks for him. I like the skill set of him, but I just think ultimately there's just too many mouths to feed to count on him on a consistent basis. And if you're a tight end, to me, you need to be able to have the potential to be a top two, maybe maybe like in a high volume offense, like say the Bengals, if the Bengals had a good tight end, you could say, okay, if he's receiver 3 at tight end, that's okay. But like in majority of offenses, if you're not the number 2 target earner on the offense at tight end, you're probably not going to have that ceiling that we're looking for. And you're just going to be like the rest of tight ends, where it's like tight end 10 to tight end 20 is a difference of like 2 points per game, maybe a 1.5. Like it's just not much of a difference. So if you can get something good for Brenton Strange, I'm good with that too. My last call out, and then we can get out of here, would be Isaiah Likely. I'm selling him as well. Consensus has him at 14. I'm just not very high on Isaiah Likely. I haven't been. And I think you can get a good price for him right now with Malik Neighbors' concerns. With that, some people might be assuming that Isaiah Likely could be the number 2 target earner on this team. And so I've never really been a big fan of Isaiah Likely. I've got him in a couple of leagues. And I'm trying to get off of him if I can. Maybe you might be able to get a first next year if you kick in like a 2. So Likely is a guy in tight end premiums, especially, that I'm trying to move.
Yeah, I've got Likely tight end 18, 4 spots below. Consensus has him as tight end 14. I'm actually 6 spots above consensus on Theo Johnson, and I have them in the same tier. I'm at tight end 24 for Theo Johnson. Consensus is at tight end 30. I like Theo Johnson more as a prospect. I think he showed some on-field chemistry with Jackson Dart last season. I get it that Likely is Harbaugh's guy, but if he was really Harbaugh's guy, like he would have played a lot more when he played for Harbaugh in Baltimore. So
it didn't amount to much last year.
Exactly, and he's had ample opportunity to like surpass. Like Mark Andrews has been in like a 2-year funk and running, and we still haven't seen Isaiah Likely emerge. So I think if anything could become more of a depth option, and they could really just cannibalize each other at the end of the day. So I would absolutely love a first round draft pick for Isaiah Likely, like you mentioned. So I think that's a really good call out. But that's going to do it. Really appreciate Pete you coming on again to chop things up. I'm sure we'll get on the mic at some point over the next couple months before we get into the meat of draft season in August and going into the season as well. Again, if you're listening here for the first time, if you're catching us on Twitter or on Substack through our newsletter, you can catch us on our brand new website at fantasyedgehq.com. It has links to our free Discord channel, as well as our Substack newsletter, our podcast links for Apple and Spotify. You can catch my top 300 Dynasty rankings and tiers, as well as my top 100 rookie rankings and tiers there as well. The 2 things I'm working on now that I expect to have by first week of June, so sometime here in the next week to 10 days, is post-draft updated best ball rankings, as well as brand new redraft rankings heading into 2026. Pete, I know you got a lot of stuff going on with Roto Underworld, as well as Player Profiler, Face Off Sports Network. What do you got going on? Where can we find you over the next couple of months in the offseason as well?
Yeah, appreciate you having me on. You can find me on X at Supernova38 with 2 R's. As for my content, I'm doing the Dynasty stock market that releases on Thursdays. We talk about the most traded players, where they're moving, risers and fallers in terms of the market. Then also, I also do first class fantasy with Wyatt. That also goes out on Saturdays. A lot of interesting stuff coming up. So excited and just ready to get to redraft season soon. We got about a month and a half of hardcore Dynasty content before we switch gears. So excited for that. And we're kind of approaching that time of the year where it starts to get really, really fun for fantasy, especially for the sickos. And I'm excited for it. And hopefully we can jump on the mic again sometime soon.
Yeah, absolutely, man. Everybody listening, if you appreciate it, if you could leave a rating or review, whether you're listening on Apple, Spotify, Overcast, whatever podcast app that you're using, or subscribe and hit the like button on YouTube as well at Chris Dell Fantasy. I'll be doing weekly FantasyPros Q&As on their Discord, as well as on the fantasy football subthread community on Reddit, occasional AMAs there as well. Appreciate